In a world where appearances dictate assumptions, a single act of prejudice can expose the deep-rooted horrors of systemic bias. Tonight, in a quiet suburban town, a routine drive takes a dangerous turn. A black man, seated in his car, scrolls through his phone under the dim glow of a streetlight. For him, it's a brief pause after a long day. But for the white officer driving past, it's something entirely different. Narrator. Suspicion blooms where understanding is absent. A decision made in seconds will unravel lives and challenge the system itself. Little did Officer Harris know this night would turn his career and his life upside down. Officer Ryan Harris is a young, ambitious officer, freshly into his third year on the force. Raised in a sheltered community and shaped by an environment where stereotypes often masquerade as truths, Harris believes in one guiding principle: profiling for safety. To him, quick assumptions mean quick actions and quicker results. What he doesn't see, however, is the growing shadow of bias creeping into his decisions. Tonight, Harris is out on routine patrol. For him, the quiet streets of this predominantly white suburban town seem like the perfect place to spot outsiders. It's not malice driving him, just a deep-seated conviction that people who don't belong stand out. A few blocks away, another story unfolds. Chief Derek Marshall, the highest-ranking officer in the region, sits parked under the soft glow of a street lamp. After a grueling 12-hour day, he's taking a moment to unwind. Dressed in plain clothes and driving an unmarked vehicle, Marshall reflects on the challenges he faces, not only as a leader, but as a black man in law enforcement. Marshall is a man of humility, deeply respected by his peers for his fairness and calm demeanor. But as he sits there, unaware of the judgment brewing just down the road, he is reminded of a truth he has lived with his entire life. No amount of success can shield him from the assumptions of others. It doesn't take long for Harris to notice the dark sedan parked on the side of the road. The dimly lit figure inside is barely visible, but to Harris, the sight is enough to spark suspicion. A lone car at this hour, on this street? His mind races with possibilities. Perhaps the man is dealing drugs. Perhaps he's casing homes for a robbery. Without running the plates or verifying any details, Harris makes his decision. This is a situation that needs intervention now. But what Officer Harris sees as vigilance is, in truth, the first step down a path of humiliation, regret, and exposure. As the officer moves closer, he tightens his grip on his flashlight. His posture is rigid, his steps deliberate. He doesn't see the calm expression on the man's face inside the car. He doesn't see the badge resting on the dashboard, obscured by shadows. All Harris sees is what his biases allow him to see. Suspicion where there is none. In this moment, two worlds collide, the world of assumptions and the reality of identity. What follows will challenge everything Harris believes about himself, his job, and the society he's sworn to protect. Officer Harris approaches with purpose, his flashlight raised high. The beam, harsh and unrelenting, lands squarely on the face of Chief Derek Marshall. The calm man seated inside blinks against the sudden glare, momentarily stunned by the intensity of the light. Narrator. Without hesitation, Harris demands attention. Hands where I can see them. He barks, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. To him, this is protocol. To Chief Marshall, it's an all-too-familiar prelude to humiliation. "Is there a problem, officer?" Marshall asks politely, his voice carrying no hint of defiance, but his calm demeanor intended to de-escalate, only fuels Harris's suspicion. The officer mistakes it for arrogance, for resistance. Harris leans closer, the tension thick in the night air. "What are you doing here?" he snaps. "This is a quiet neighborhood. You don't look like you belong." The words hang heavy, each one a reflection of a prejudice Harris doesn't even realize he holds. Marshall reaches for his wallet, slowly and deliberately, careful not to make any sudden movements. From within, he retrieves his identification and extends it toward the officer. But Harris doesn't take it. He doesn't even glance at it. "Officer, I'm more than happy to explain, but perhaps you should look at this first." His voice is steady, almost weary, as though he's been here before, and in many ways, he has. But Harris doesn't relent. "Step out of the car," he orders, his hand hovering dangerously close to the holster at his side. The identification in Marshall's hand is ignored, dismissed as irrelevant. To Harris, compliance isn't enough. Submission is required. As Marshall opens the door and steps out, the humiliation begins to take shape. Bystanders, curious and concerned, pull out their phones, their cameras capturing a moment that should never have happened. Each flash of light from a phone feels like a spotlight on injustice. Backup arrives, adding another layer of indignity. 2 more officers step out, their expressions unreadable as they survey the scene. Harris points toward Marshall, briefing them in hushed tones that carry the weight of assumption and bias. Inside, Marshall battles a storm of emotions: frustration, humiliation, fear. He wonders how many times he will have to prove his worth, his humanity, in a world that refuses to see him beyond his skin. His mind drifts, unbidden, to memories of past encounters. In his early days as an officer, he had been mistaken for a suspect during a call. Years later, as a detective, he was pulled over in his own neighborhood while driving an unmarked vehicle. Each incident left a mark, invisible to the world, but etched deeply in his spirit. Now, standing under the streetlight, the chief feels the weight of those memories, merging with the reality of this moment. A man who has dedicated his life to justice finds himself at the mercy of a system he works tirelessly to improve. A system that, in this moment, has failed him once again. But Harris, blind to the implications, refuses. In his mind, authority must be asserted, questions must not be entertained, and in this refusal, the seeds of his downfall are sown. What should have been a routine interaction takes a dark turn. Officer Harris, convinced of wrongdoing, reaches for his cuffs. Chief Derek Marshall stands still, his hands raised slightly, his composure unshaken. But inside, a storm brews, a familiar frustration fueled by years of experiences like this one. "You're under arrest for resisting," Harris declares, his voice sharp and unyielding. The words cut through the night, eliciting murmurs from the growing crowd. For Marshall, the accusation is as absurd as it is infuriating. "I'm resisting?" "Officer, I haven't moved. I've done nothing wrong." His words, spoken with dignity, fall on deaf ears. Harris interprets the chief's calm resistance as defiance, a challenge to his authority. The crowd, once silent observers, begins to stir. Whispers of injustice ripple through them, carried on the night air. Phones are raised higher, their screens capturing every moment. To those watching, this isn't law enforcement. It's something else entirely. "Officer Harris, I suggest you run my ID. You're making a mistake. One you'll regret." The warning, calm yet unmistakably firm, is ignored. To Harris, it's just another attempt to undermine his authority. Reinforcements arrive. The supervising officer, Sergeant Daniels, steps out of his vehicle, his eyes scanning the scene. But instead of questioning the situation, Daniels aligns himself with Harris. Together, they uphold the flawed narrative, dismissing the murmurs of the crowd and the calm pleas of the man in cuffs. Daniels glances briefly at the chief, his expression unreadable, but instead of diffusing the situation, he nods. The chain of command reinforces Harris's actions, layering authority over injustice, as if the weight of their badges could justify what's unfolding. Among the crowd, unease gives way to anger. The story playing out before them is not new. It's one they've seen too many times before. A man judged not by his actions, but by the color of his skin. In this moment, the horror becomes clear. When even those in power, those who dedicate their lives to justice, are stripped of dignity and reduced to mere stereotypes, what hope is left for the rest of society? How deep do the roots of racism run when a badge offers no protection? Marshall stands tall, but the weight of the cuffs feels heavier than ever. Each click of metal is a reminder of the systemic bias he has fought against, now turned against him. His authority, his achievements, his identity, none of it matters in this moment. All that remains is the judgment of those who refuse to see beyond the surface. "Run my ID," he repeats, his tone unwavering. "You'll regret this." But Harris, blinded by his convictions, dismisses the plea once more. To him, it's arrogance. To the crowd, it's the truth waiting to be revealed. Justice, once a pillar of the system, now seems out of reach, and as the night unfolds, the weight of this moment will ripple far beyond the street corner, leaving scars on everyone involved. As the police station's fluorescent lights flicker above, the gravity of the situation begins to settle. The sound of shoes on tile echoes down the hall as another officer, curious about the identification in Harris's report, runs it through the system. What follows is the unraveling of a mistake so monumental that it threatens not just Harris's career, but the integrity of the entire department. The officer's fingers freeze on the keyboard as the name appears on the screen. Derek Marshall. A name Harris has only heard in passing. A name he had no idea held such weight. What the officer sees on the screen is not just any name. It's the name of the chief of police, the same chief who until moments ago had been handcuffed in the station's holding area. The officer rushes to the captain's office, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Sir, we've made a huge mistake." The captain, engrossed in paperwork, barely looks up at first, but when the officer repeats the words, urgency creeps into his voice. "What mistake?" he demands, rising from his chair. The officer explains the situation, how Chief Marshall, the very man they had detained, wasn't just any civilian. He was their superior. The man Harris had so carelessly arrested was not only the head of the department, but also one of the most prominent figures in law enforcement reform in the state. The captain's face turns pale, his eyes narrowing with disbelief. A bead of sweat forms on his brow as he processes the magnitude of the error. In an instant, the department's entire credibility is in jeopardy. Officer Harris enters the captain's office, unaware of the storm that is about to hit. His usual confidence is gone, replaced by a nervous tension. The captain, his voice cold and stern, doesn't waste a moment. "Harris, do you know who you arrested tonight?" The words land like a hammer. "Yes, sir. The man who was, Harris begins, but the captain interrupts him. "A man who was Derek Marshall, chief of police. And he just handcuffed him." The words echo in Harris's mind. the weight of them sinking in with painful clarity. Harris's face pales as the reality of the mistake dawns on him. He had acted on nothing but suspicion, guided by the blind certainty of his biases. The authority of the chief, the man he had humiliated, was a truth he had failed to see. And as Harris stumbles to apologize, the door swings open again, and Derek Marshall steps into the room. The chief, now free from the cuffs that had once bound him, walks in with a calm that belies the storm inside. His eyes meet Harris's, not with rage, but with quiet, unflinching authority. Marshall stands in front of Harris, who is now visibly shaken. The chief's voice, when it comes, is calm, but laced with a quiet fury. "You don't know what it's like to be looked at as a threat just because of the color of your skin," he begins, his words cutting through the silence like a blade. "But I do. I've spent my entire career fighting not just for justice, but to prove that my accomplishments have value. You had the chance to treat me with dignity, Officer Harris. Instead, you chose to make an assumption, to arrest me, and that choice wasn't made because of anything I did. It was made because of who you thought I was." Marshall's voice hardens with quiet anger as he continues. His next words, though soft, land with the force of a thunderclap. "I've worked my entire life to break down these barriers, to show that black men and women can be trusted, can be leaders in law enforcement, and you, by your actions tonight, are an example of everything that is wrong with this system." Harris, his face flushed with shame, opens his mouth to speak, but no words come. What can he say? How can he justify his actions when they have been so transparently wrong? The silence stretches between them, the weight of the moment unspoken but undeniable. "You've made a colossal mistake, Harris, but you can't undo it. All you can do now is learn from it." The words, though spoken with authority, carry a hint of sadness, an acknowledgement of the pain that lingers in the wake of systemic injustice. As Harris stands there, humbled by the truth that has been revealed, he is forced to confront the harsh reality of his own biases. For Chief Derek Marshall, the road ahead is one of healing and reform. But for Officer Harris, this moment will define his future, a future forever marked by this single act of prejudice. In the aftermath of the events that unfolded that night, the consequences of Officer Harris's actions are far-reaching. The damage done to the chief's dignity can never be fully repaired, but the wheels of justice turn slowly, and now it is Harris who must answer for his mistake. Harris is called in for disciplinary action, his once promising career now teetering on the edge. The captain, with a grave expression, informs him of the mandatory racial sensitivity training that he will be required to undergo. It is a decision made not just for Harris's future, but as a warning to the entire department. One that signifies the beginning of a long, difficult road toward addressing systemic racism within their ranks. While the training is a small step in the right direction, the scars of Harris's actions run deep, both within the department and throughout the community. His public apology to Chief Marshall, though heartfelt, is met with skepticism. The damage to his reputation is irreversible. The same biases he harbored in that moment will be forever linked to his name, a stain on his record that no amount of public contrition can erase. The apology is broadcast to the public, a formal statement read with forced sincerity. Harris's voice cracks as he delivers his words, but the weight of his apology fails to reach everyone. The community watches with judgment, and the division within the department becomes ever more apparent. Some wonder if this is enough. Others know that it is only the beginning. For Chief Derek Marshall, the consequences are different. Though the cuffs are off and his status is reinstated, the emotional toll is far heavier. He walks through the hallways of his department with his head held high, but the weight of the night's events still lingers, haunting him in quiet moments when no one is looking. The dehumanization, the humiliation, it all comes rushing back. Marshall's thoughts turn inward as he recalls not just that night, but a lifetime of similar experiences. It isn't the first time he's been racially profiled, nor will it be the last. As chief of police, he has risen to the highest ranks, earning respect through years of dedication. But none of that mattered that night. In the eyes of Officer Harris, and in the eyes of those who allowed this incident to unfold, Marshall was still just another black man, a target for bias and suspicion. In this moment, Marshall reflects on the painful truth that even those at the highest echelons of power aren't immune to prejudice. Not even a chief of police, not even someone who has spent their life dismantling the very system that failed him that night. Even the highest ranks can't shield someone from the cold, harsh realities of racial bias. The system, he knows, is deeply broken. The true horror of that night isn't just the unlawful arrest, the humiliation, or the miscarriage of justice. It's the fact that even in a position of power, Marshall was still reduced to nothing more than a threat, his authority disregarded, his dignity stripped away, and his humanity questioned. The system that was meant to protect him had, instead, become a tool of oppression. And so, as Harris faces the consequences of his actions, and the chief reflects on the deep wounds of racial bias, the story doesn't end here. For Chief Marshall, the journey toward healing will be long, filled with difficult conversations and painful realizations. For Officer Harris, the path to redemption is uncertain, a road defined by self-awareness, growth, and the courage to confront the biases that still reside in his heart. In the end, justice was served, but it came at a steep cost, and the true price of prejudice is paid, not just by those who are targeted, but by the system itself, a system that must one day confront its own reflection if it hopes to heal. As the night draws to a close, we return to Chief Derek Marshall. The hum of the police station has quieted, and the weight of the evening's events lingers heavy in the air. Alone in his office, Marshall sits at his desk, the light from a solitary lamp casting long shadows on the walls. His fingers trace the edges of a framed photo sitting before him, a picture of his family. His gaze holds steady, though the weight in his eyes tells a story far deeper than words ever could. Marshall, this is more than just a moment of reflection. It is a painful reminder that, despite everything he's accomplished, he is still viewed through the lens of racial bias. A bias that doesn't care about titles or accolades, but instead sees only skin color. And as he stares at the image of his loved ones, the thought weighs heavily on him. What kind of world am I raising them in? This story isn't unique. It is, unfortunately, a reflection of a grim reality faced by countless individuals every single day. In cities, towns, and communities across the world, people of color are dehumanized, profiled, and treated as threats simply because of the color of their skin. This is not a rare incident. It is part of a larger, systemic issue that continues to permeate all corners of society, including the very institutions that are meant to protect us. The horror isn't just in the actions of one officer. It's in the environment that enables such acts to happen. It's in the unchecked prejudices that run deep within our systems and in the hearts of those who carry them. We cannot ignore it any longer. We cannot allow this to continue. So I ask you, what needs to change in our society to ensure that this never happens again? How can we, as individuals and as a collective, confront and dismantle the biases that are woven so deeply into our systems? It's not just about one officer, one department, or one case. It's about a call to action for all of us. If you believe that change is necessary, that justice should be blind to race, and that no one should ever be treated as less than human because of their skin color, then I encourage you to take action. Share this video, start the conversation, like and subscribe to spread awareness, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Let's not let this story be another forgotten incident. Together, we can bring about the change that is so desperately needed. Don't stay silent, because silence only allows the injustice to persist. Thank you for watching, and remember, our voices have the power to create change. Use yours.